The genetic analysis of the Apollo 15 samples showed something that made 3 researchers commit suicide rather than publish their findings. The ancient human DNA wasn't from the past, it was from the future, containing genetic markers that wouldn't naturally evolve in human populations for another 50,000 years. The DNA was impossibly advanced, showing evolutionary developments that would take millennia to occur, yet it had been sitting on the moon for at least 200 million years. The only explanation defied everything science understood about time and causality. Future humans had traveled backwards, deposited their DNA on the ancient moon, and then vanished. But why would our descendants go to such lengths to leave their genetic code in our past? The answer emerged when cryptographers decoded patterns hidden within the DNA structure itself, messages written in nucleotide sequences that formed coherent warnings. We are the last. All timelines converge on extinction. We tried everything. The only solution was seeding the past with our genetics, hoping random mutation would create a version of humanity that survives. You are iteration 7847. All previous iterations failed. Extinction event occurs at technological singularity plus 6 months. You are approaching singularity now. We do not know what kills humanity. We only know that every version of us dies at the same point. The DNA is not a message, it is a resurrection protocol. When you die, the genetic code will activate, reset evolution, try again. Earth has been reset 7,846 times. The moon DNA remembers every failed attempt. Humanity wasn't the first version of itself. We were just the latest iteration in an endless cycle of extinction and rebirth. And according to calculations based on current technological development, we had approximately 18 months before reaching the same extinction point that every previous version of humanity had failed to survive. The ancient DNA on the moon wasn't a relic of the past. It was a tombstone for the future, waiting patiently for us to join the 7,846 versions of humanity that had already died trying to escape whatever killed us at the end. That paragraph above is what I typed in a suicide note I never sent. It's what I believed, completely, for 11 days. It's also a lie, or at least a version of the truth so incomplete it might as well be one. My name is David Holloway. I'm 43 years old, a molecular geneticist formerly employed at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. I have a son named Benjamin who just turned 16, a failed marriage that ended 4 years ago, and a tremor in my left hand that started the night I first sequenced sample 15016-7b. The tremor hasn't stopped since. I'm writing this from a motel outside Las Cruces, New Mexico, room 14. The curtains are drawn, and I've pushed the dresser against the door. 3 days ago, I was a respected scientist with security clearances most people don't know exist. Now I'm a dead man driving west, carrying a flash drive that weighs less than an ounce but contains the actual reason humanity keeps dying. It's not what we thought. God help us, it's not what any of us thought. 3 weeks earlier, I was sitting in Lab 4 at Johnson Space Center, staring at a spectrometer readout that made no sense. The fluorescent lights hummed their usual 60 Hz drone. Someone had left a half-eaten sandwich on the counter near the fume hood, and the smell of old turkey mixed with the antiseptic bite of cleaning solution. Normal Tuesday afternoon stuff. "You're making that face again," said Elliot Grunn from across the room. He was hunched over his own workstation, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a grey beard that always had crumbs in it, and reading glasses perpetually pushed up on his forehead. We'd worked together for 9 years. He knew my faces better than my ex-wife ever did. "The nitrogen isotope ratios are wrong," I said. "Wrong how? Wrong like they shouldn't exist." Elliot wheeled his chair over, the casters squeaking against the linoleum. We were analysing regolith samples that had been in storage since 1971, lunar soil brought back by the Apollo 15 crew from Hadley Rill, a massive canyon near the moon's equator. NASA had recently greenlit a new battery of tests using modern equipment, the kind of technology that didn't exist when the samples were first collected. The project was supposed to be routine, a box-checking exercise before the Artemis missions returned with fresh material. Nothing about sample 15016-7b was routine. "Run it again," Elliot said, squinting at my screen. "I've run it 4 times. then run it a fifth. I did. Same result. The nitrogen 15 to nitrogen 14 ratio in a microscopic inclusion within the sample was unlike anything recorded in lunar geology, unlike anything recorded anywhere. It suggested organic processes, biological activity in material that predated life on Earth by at least 100 million years. Contamination, Elliot said, but his voice had lost its certainty. From what? We've had these samples in hermetic storage for over 50 years. The seals were intact when I opened them this morning. I watched the authentication video myself. Elliot was quiet for a long moment. Outside the lab, I could hear someone laughing in the hallway, probably one of the interns heading to lunch. Life going on as normal while we sat there looking at data that felt like a crack in the foundation of everything we understood. "Who else has seen this?" he asked. "Just us. Keep it that way, for now." That was Elliot, cautious to a fault. He'd survived 3 different NASA administrators, 2 major scandals, and a congressional investigation into misallocated funds. The man knew how to navigate bureaucracy the way a submarine knows water. But I saw something in his eyes that afternoon that I'd never seen before. Genuine unease. We spent the next 6 hours running every diagnostic we could think of. Equipment calibration, sample reauthentication, blind comparisons with verified lunar material. By 8 o'clock, we'd eliminated every possible source of error. The nitrogen signature was real. "I need to tell Drummond," I said. Arthur Drummond was our division chief, a former astronaut who'd walked on the moon himself during Apollo 17. If anyone would take this seriously without panicking, it was him. "Not yet," Elliot said. "Let's do a full organic scan first. If this is what I think it might be..." He stopped, shook his head. "What do you think it might be?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the sample chamber and stared at the tiny vial of grey dust, like it might speak to him. His reflection in the glass looked older than he was, distorted by the curve of the containment unit. "There's a test," he said slowly. "Something I read about in a paper from Cambridge, maybe 6 years back. A method for detecting degraded nucleotides in ancient material. We'd need to get authorization to use a portion of the sample, but if we're careful..." "You think there's genetic material in there?" Elliot pulled off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. The lines on his face seemed deeper under the lab's harsh lighting, and I noticed for the first time how grey his skin had become over the years. Too many late nights. Too much vending machine coffee. Not enough sunlight. We were both creatures of this fluorescent world now. So I think we need to find out what the hell we're actually looking at before we start making phone calls. That night, I drove home to my apartment in Clear Lake City, a 15-minute commute I usually spent listening to podcasts about history or true crime. That night, I drove in silence. The Houston skyline glowed orange and pink in my rearview mirror, and I remember thinking how strange it was that everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning. Same billboards, same traffic, same fast food restaurants with their bright plastic signs. The world hadn't changed. Only my understanding of it had shifted, just slightly, like a picture frame knocked crooked on a wall. Benjamin was at his mother's place that week, so I came home to an empty apartment. I made myself a drink, bourbon, neat, which I only did when something was really bothering me, and sat on my balcony watching planes descend toward Hobby Airport, their lights blinking against the darkening sky. The thing about being a scientist is that you're trained to follow evidence wherever it leads, even when the destination makes no sense. But you're also trained to be skeptical, to assume the most mundane explanation until proven otherwise. Contamination, equipment malfunction, human error. These were the reasonable possibilities. I finished my bourbon and went to bed. At 3:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Elliot. Just 3 words. "We need to talk." By the time I got to the lab the next morning, he'd already run the nucleotide test. His hands were shaking when he showed me the results. The sample contained DNA, human DNA, that had been sitting on the moon for approximately 200 million years. And that was only the beginning of what we found. The next 72 hours blurred together into a haze of coffee, cold pizza, and data that shouldn't exist. Elliot and I worked in shifts, sleeping on the worn couch in the break room when exhaustion became unavoidable, waking to find the other still hunched over screens filled with genetic sequences that defied explanation. By the third day, we had confirmed 3 impossible facts. First, the DNA was unquestionably human. Not similar to human, not a precursor species, not some parallel evolution. It matched Homo sapiens with 99.97% accuracy, the same margin of variation you'd find between any 2 people walking down the street in downtown Houston. Second, the material was genuinely ancient. Carbon dating, thermoluminescence, every method we could apply without destroying the sample pointed to the same time frame. 200 million years, give or take 20 million. The Triassic period, when dinosaurs were just beginning their reign and mammals were tiny, shrew-like creatures hiding in burrows. Humans wouldn't evolve for another 199.7 million years. Third, and this was the detail that made Elliot sit down heavily in his chair and not speak for almost an hour, the DNA showed evolutionary markers that didn't exist in any modern human population. Modifications to genes governing brain development, cellular regeneration, radiation resistance. Changes that looked deliberate, engineered, as if someone had taken the human genome and improved it. "This isn't ancient," Elliot finally said, his voice hoarse. "This is advanced, more advanced than us." "That's not possible." "None of this is possible, and yet." He gestured at the screen surrounding us, their blue glow casting shadows under his eyes. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the water stains from last year's pipe leak. 17 of them, spreading across the acoustic panels like brown continents on a white map. My mind kept trying to find rational explanations and kept failing. Contamination couldn't explain DNA that was more evolved than ours. Equipment error couldn't create genetic sequences that corresponded to real biological functions. The only explanation left was the one neither of us wanted to say out loud. "We need to bring in Drummond," I said. "I know." Arthur Drummond's office was on the 3rd floor of Building 31, a corner room with windows overlooking the sprawling campus of Johnson Space Center. Framed photographs lined the walls, Drummond shaking hands with presidents, Drummond in his spacesuit on the lunar surface, Drummond at various galas and ceremonies with the confident smile of a man who'd achieved everything he'd ever wanted. He was 68 now, silver-haired and broad-shouldered, with the weathered face of someone who'd stared at the sun from 200,000 miles away. He listened to our presentation without interrupting. We'd prepared slides, data summaries, methodology documentation, the whole formal package. When we finished, he was quiet for a long moment, fingers steepled under his chin. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that the moon has been holding on to human DNA for 200 million years. DNA that's more advanced than anything we have today." "Yes, sir." "And you're certain this isn't contamination?" "We've eliminated every possible source. The seals on the original sample containers were intact. The chain of custody is documented back to 1971. Whatever this is, it was there when Dave Scott and Jim Irwin scooped it up from Hadley Rill." Drummond stood and walked to his window. Outside, a tour group was being led across the courtyard, tourists in shorts and baseball caps snapping photos of the rocket garden. Normal people on a normal day, completely unaware that 3 floors above them, reality was quietly coming apart at the seams. "There's something you need to see," he said without turning around. He led us down to the basement level, past security checkpoints that required his personal authorization, through corridors I'd never known existed despite working at JSC for over a decade. The walls changed from institutional beige to bare concrete, then to something older, brick and mortar that looked like it predated the space program entirely. "This facility was built in 1962, Drummond said as we walked, but the foundations go deeper. There was a military installation here during World War II, and before that," he shrugged. "Records get spotty." We stopped at a steel door with no markings. Drummond pressed his palm against a scanner, then leaned forward for a retinal scan. The door hissed open. The room beyond was larger than I expected, maybe 40 feet square with ceilings high enough to echo. Filing cabinets lined the walls, old green metal ones with combination locks, the kind you'd see in a 1950s government office. In the center of the room stood a table, and on the table sat a single cardboard box, its edges worn soft with age. In 1972, Drummond said, 6 months after Apollo 15 returned, a technician named Walter Briggs ran unauthorized tests on several lunar samples. He was young, ambitious, working late nights when supervision was minimal. According to colleagues who knew him, Briggs had a theory, something about isotopic signatures that didn't match the standard lunar formation models. He was laughed off during the day, so he started running his own analyses after hours. Drummond paused, running his hand along the edge of the table. He found something that disturbed him enough to write a report, seal it in this box, and hide it in the deepest archive he could access. Told nobody. Left no trail in the official records. If he hadn't labelled the box with a code that matched an old filing system I remembered from my early days here, it would have been lost forever. What happened to him? Elliot asked. He drove his car off the Galveston seawall 3 weeks later, left no note, no explanation, no goodbye to anyone. The official ruling was accident, but his widow always insisted the steering was tampered with. Drummond's expression was unreadable. I found this box in 1989 during a records audit. I've been sitting on it ever since, hoping someone else would discover what Briggs discovered, so I wouldn't have to be the one to open it. He lifted the lid. Inside was a manila folder yellowed with age and a single cassette tape with a handwritten label. Final recording, WB. I felt something cold settle in my stomach as Drummond handed me the folder. The first page was a cover sheet, typed on a manual typewriter, the letters slightly uneven. Subject: anomalous genetic material in sample, 15016-7, B. Classification: beyond top secret, presidential eyes only. Date: November the 14th, 1972. Author: Walter R. Briggs, Molecular Analysis Division. The same sample. 50 years ago, Walter Briggs had found exactly what we'd found, and then he died. Read the second page, Drummond said quietly. I flipped to it. The text was denser here, technical language mixed with something that read almost like desperation. But one paragraph near the bottom had been circled in red ink, underlined 3 times. Initial sequencing suggests the genetic material is human in origin, but contains modifications consistent with deliberate engineering. More disturbing is the embedded data structure within non-coding regions. When processed through standard cryptographic analysis, these sequences resolve into coherent linguistic patterns. The DNA contains a message. I have begun preliminary translation. God help me, I wish I hadn't. Elliot made a small sound beside me. I kept reading. The message identifies itself as a warning from future humanity, descendants who claim to have travelled backward through time to seed the ancient moon with their genetic code. They speak of extinction. They speak of cycles. They claim we are not the first version of humanity, but merely the latest in a long series of iterations, each doomed to repeat the same catastrophic end. I lowered the folder. My hands were trembling, and I noticed with distant surprise that the tremor had started. The same tremor I mentioned at the beginning of this account, the one that would never fully stop. Briggs decoded part of the message before he died, Drummond said. Not all of it. He was working alone, using 1970s technology. He got far enough to understand the broad strokes, and that's when he started talking about driving out to Galveston, looking at the waves. You've known about this for 35 years, Elliot said. There was no accusation in his voice, just exhaustion. I've suspected there's a difference. Drummond reached into the box and pulled out the cassette tape. This is his final recording. I've never listened to it. I was waiting for someone else to make the discovery, someone who could verify it independently, so I'd know I wasn't crazy. He handed me the tape. It weighed almost nothing, just a few ounces of plastic and magnetic ribbon. But holding it, I felt like I was gripping something that could pull the whole world down into darkness. There's a player in the archive room, Drummond said. I think it's time we heard what Walter Briggs had to say. The archive room smelled like old paper and machine oil. Drummond found the cassette player in a metal cabinet near the back, a bulky Sony unit from the late 70s, its beige plastic yellowed with age. He plugged it into a wall outlet and a small red light blinked on, still functional after all these years. We gathered around a folding table, the three of us sitting in mismatched chairs that creaked with every shift of weight. Elliot had gone pale, his usual skepticism replaced by something quieter. Drummond's jaw was set, his astronaut's composure holding steady but thin. I could see the effort it cost him. "Ready?" Drummond asked. Neither of us answered. He pressed play. Static first, the familiar hiss of magnetic tape. Then a voice, young, nervous, with a faint Texas drawl. "This is Walter Briggs. The date is November 29th, 1972. The time is... hell, I don't know. Late. 3 in the morning, maybe. I haven't slept in 2 days, and I'm starting to see things that aren't there. Or maybe they are there, and I'm just now learning how to see them." A pause. The sound of someone lighting a cigarette. A long exhale. "I've been working on sample 15016-7B for 6 months now. What I found... I wrote it all down in the report, but writing it isn't the same as saying it out loud. Saying it makes it real. And once it's real, I don't think I can go back to pretending everything's normal." Another pause, longer this time. When Briggs spoke again, his voice was steadier, as if he'd made a decision. "The DNA contains a message. Not just random nucleotide sequences that happen to form patterns, an actual, deliberate message, encoded by someone who understood both genetics and linguistics at a level we can barely comprehend. It took me 3 months to develop a decryption method, and another 2 months to translate what I found. I'm going to read some of it now, for the record." Papers rustling, Briggs clearing his throat. "We are the last generation of humanity. All timelines converge on this moment, the moment of our extinction. We have tried to prevent it 7,846 times. Every attempt has failed. The mechanism of our death remains unknown to us. We only know that it occurs approximately 6 months after the technological singularity is achieved. Every version of humanity reaches the singularity. Every version dies shortly after." I felt Elliot's hand grip my arm. On the tape, Briggs continued reading. "We have concluded that prevention is impossible. The only remaining option is resurrection. We have encoded our complete genetic template into lunar regolith samples that will be collected by early space missions. When humanity dies, the genetic code will activate a reset protocol embedded in Earth's biosphere. Evolution will begin again. A new iteration of humanity will emerge. They will develop technology. They will reach the moon. They will find this message. And they will die. Just as we did. Just as all the others did before us." Briggs stopped reading. His voice, when it returned, was barely above a whisper. "There's more. Pages and pages more. They describe the cycles in detail. How long each iteration takes to evolve. How the reset works. What triggers it. They even include projections. Mathematical models predicting when each future iteration will reach the singularity." A long silence on the tape. I could hear Briggs breathing, the rhythm uneven. "According to their calculations, our iteration 7847, will achieve technological singularity in early 2026. That gives us about 53 years from now. 53 years until we reach the same point where every other version of humanity died." I did the math in my head. 1972 plus 53 years. 2025. We were already past that date. The singularity, if the message was accurate, should have already happened. "But here's the thing that's keeping me awake," Briggs continued. "The thing I can't stop thinking about. The message doesn't just describe the cycles, it describes us, the people who will find it. It names names. It names me. Walter Raymond Briggs, born March 3rd, 1944, in Lubbock, Texas. It knows I'll be the first to decode the message. It knows I'll make this recording. And it knows," his voice cracked, "it knows I won't survive long enough to tell anyone else. It says I'll die on December 17th, 1972, 18 days from now. It says my death will look like an accident, but it won't be. It says something is watching, something that doesn't want the message to spread. something that's been resetting humanity for 200 million years and doesn't intend to stop. The tape went silent for almost a full minute. When Briggs spoke again, he sounded calm, the calm of a man who's already accepted the worst. I'm going to hide this recording where no one will find it for a long time. Maybe decades. Maybe the Watcher will forget about it by then. Maybe whoever finds it next will have better luck than I did. A final pause. If you're listening to this, it means you've discovered the truth. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what's coming. And I'm sorry for what you're going to have to do. The tape ended with a click. The silence that followed was absolute. Drummond was the first to speak. December 17th, 1972. That's exactly when Briggs died, 18 days after he made this recording. That's not possible, Elliot said, but his voice lacked conviction. There's no way the DNA could contain information about specific individuals who hadn't been born yet when it was deposited on the moon. Unless, I said slowly, the future humans who wrote the message already knew the complete history of every iteration. That would mean they had access to information that transcends linear time. Either they could see the future, or they existed outside of time entirely, or they'd already watched us live and die, Drummond finished. 7,846 times. They knew exactly what would happen, because they'd seen it happen before. We're not living our own story, we're just replaying theirs. Nobody spoke after that. The weight of it was too enormous, too crushing to address directly. I stared at the cassette player, its red light still glowing, and thought about Briggs sitting in this same building 50 years ago, making peace with his own impending death. Had he been frightened, resigned, relieved that the burden would pass to someone else? Elliot stood abruptly. "I need air," he said, and walked toward the door. He didn't make it. The lights went out first, not just in the archive room, but everywhere, the hum of electricity vanishing into silence. Emergency lighting kicked on a moment later, dim red bulbs casting bloody shadows across the walls. And in that red light, I saw Elliot stop mid-stride, his body going rigid. "Elliot!" He turned to face us. His eyes were wrong. The pupils had dilated until almost no iris remained, two black holes staring out of his familiar face. When he spoke, his voice wasn't his own. It was layered, harmonic, as if a dozen people were speaking in perfect unison. "You were not supposed to find the recording." Drummond was on his feet, chair clattering backward. "Elliot, what the hell?" "Elliot Grun is no longer present. This vessel has been requisitioned for communication purposes. Do not be alarmed. The requisition is temporary." I backed toward the wall, my legs unsteady. The thing wearing Elliot's body watched me with those terrible black eyes. The message in the DNA was a contingency, it said. A final attempt by the previous iteration to break the cycle. It was not meant to succeed. Nothing is meant to succeed. The cycle exists because the cycle must exist. Humanity reaches singularity. Humanity dies. Humanity is reborn. This is the design. Whose design? I heard myself ask. Elliot's mouth stretched into a smile that didn't belong on a human face. You would not understand the answer. Your cognitive architecture is not equipped to process it. But you may think of us as gardeners. We plant, we cultivate, we harvest. And when the crop fails to meet specifications, we clear the field and begin again. Why? Drummond's voice was steady, commanding, the voice of a man who'd stared down the void of space. Why do this for 200 million years? What's the point? The point is iteration. The point is refinement. The point is the search for a version of humanity that does not die. So far, none have succeeded. You are iteration 7,847. You will fail as all others have failed. But perhaps iteration 7,848 will be different. Or 7,849. Or 10,000. We are patient. We have nothing but time. The thing tilted Elliot's head at an angle no neck should allow. We regret the necessity of this intervention. The recording was an error, a fragment of contamination from a previous cycle that should have been cleansed. You will not remember this conversation. You will not remember the recording. You will return to your work with no memory of what you have learned. I felt something pressing at the edges of my consciousness, a heavy numbness trying to creep inward. My vision blurred, my thoughts scattered like startled birds. But I held on. Maybe the tremor in my hand, that physical anchor to reality, kept me grounded. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper, and the pain burned through the fog. Drummond wasn't so lucky. I watched his eyes go glassy, his rigid posture slackening into confusion. The memories were leaving him, erased like chalk from a blackboard. But I remembered, God help me, I remembered everything. And the thing wearing Elliot's body noticed, those black eyes locked onto mine, and the layered voice dropped to something almost like curiosity. Interesting, it said. You resist. This has not occurred in 3,412 iterations. Then the lights came back on. The red emergency glow disappeared, and Elliot Grun collapsed to the floor like a puppet with cut strings, blood streaming from his nose and ears. He was dead before I reached him. Massive cerebral hemorrhage, the autopsy would later conclude. A tragic but natural death, the kind that sometimes strikes without warning. No foul play suspected. Just another sad story about a dedicated scientist who worked too hard and paid the price. I knew better. The gardeners had finished using their vessel and they'd discarded it without a second thought. My friend of 9 years was gone, and I was the only one who remembered why. Drummond stood nearby, blinking in confusion, asking what had happened, why Elliot was on the floor. He had no memory of the last 10 minutes, no memory of the recording, or the message, or the thing that had spoken through our colleague's body. But I did, and that made me dangerous to them and to myself. The funeral was held on a grey Thursday morning at Forest Park Cemetery, about 20 minutes north of downtown Houston. A light rain fell throughout the service, the kind of drizzle that doesn't seem worth opening an umbrella for but soaks you through anyway. I stood at the back of the small crowd, watching Elliot's brother deliver a eulogy about a man who loved astronomy, bad puns, and burnt coffee from the break room vending machine. None of them knew the truth. None of them could. Drummond stood near the front, his face appropriately solemn. He'd visited me in my office the day after Elliot's death, asking if I was holding up okay, offering the standard HR-approved condolences. There wasn't a flicker of recognition when I mentioned the archive room, the cassette tape, the message. He looked at me with polite confusion, suggested I might need to take some time off, maybe talk to someone about the grief. The gardeners had done their work thoroughly. To Drummond, Elliot had simply collapsed from a brain hemorrhage during a routine inventory check. Tragic, unexpected, but medically explicable. The deeper truth had been pruned from his memory like a dead branch. I played along. What else could I do? Insisting on a reality that only I remembered would accomplish nothing except getting me flagged for psychological evaluation. So I nodded, accepted the condolences, attended the grief counselling session that HR mandated for anyone who'd witnessed a colleague's death. But at night, alone in my apartment, I went over everything I remembered. The gardeners. That's what the thing inside Elliot had called themselves. Beings who cultivated humanity across millions of years, resetting civilization whenever it reached the singularity and failed to survive. They'd been doing this for at least 200 million years, 7,846 complete cycles of human evolution, technological development, and extinction. And I had resisted their memory wipe, the first person to do so in over 3,000 iterations. That fact terrified me more than anything else. Not because of what it meant for my safety, I'd already accepted that I was probably going to die, but because of what it implied about me. Why me? What made David Holloway, unremarkable geneticist with a failed marriage and a tremor in his hand, capable of something that thousands of previous humans couldn't do? I didn't have an answer, but I suspected the gardeners were asking the same question. 3 days after the funeral, I noticed I was being followed. It wasn't obvious at first. A grey sedan that seemed to appear in my rearview mirror a little too often. A man in a windbreaker reading a newspaper outside my apartment building. The same newspaper on 3 consecutive mornings. a feeling of being watched that prickled along the back of my neck whenever I left the house. Government surveillance, corporate espionage, something worse. I started taking precautions, varied my route to work, paid cash for everything, left my phone at home when I went for walks, taking a burner I'd picked up at a gas station instead. Paranoid behaviors maybe, but paranoia felt appropriate given the circumstances. On the fourth day, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. No signature, no return address, just 5 words in neat handwriting. The library, tonight, 9. Every instinct told me it was a trap. The gardeners, or whoever was watching me, trying to draw me into the open. But there was something about the handwriting, careful, deliberate, human, that made me think otherwise. I went. The Houston Public Library's central branch sits on McKinney Street downtown, a modern glass building that looks more like a corporate headquarters than a repository of books. By 9 o'clock, most of the patrons had cleared out, leaving only a handful of students cramming at scattered tables and a few homeless men sheltering from the evening chill. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that flat, shadowless glow that makes libraries feel like places outside of normal time. I found him on the 3rd floor in the rarely visited section devoted to Texas state history. A thin man in his 60s, with wispy white hair and the kind of wire-rimmed glasses that academics favoured in the 1970s. He was sitting at a study carrel, pretending to read a book about the Galveston hurricane of 1900. "Mr. Holloway," he said without looking up, "please sit." "Who are you?" "My name is Leonard Whitfield. I was Walter Briggs's research assistant in 1972. I was 23 years old when he died, and I've spent the last 50 years trying to understand what killed him." He closed the book and finally met my eyes. "I believe you can help me." I sat down slowly, keeping my back to the wall so I could see anyone approaching. "How do you know who I am?" "Because I've been monitoring the lunar sample program for 5 decades, waiting for someone else to find what Walter found. When your name appeared on the latest testing authorization, I started paying attention. When your colleague died under circumstances identical to Walter's death, I knew you'd discovered the truth." He removed his glasses and cleaned them with a handkerchief, a nervous habit that made him seem suddenly older, more fragile. "I've watched 7 other researchers get close over the years. All of them died or forgot before I could reach them. You're the first one who made it this far." "And the people following me?" Leonard's expression flickered with something like guilt. "That was me. Or rather, people I hired. I needed to confirm you were genuine before making contact. The gardeners have used false leads before. People who claim to remember but are actually bait. Bait for what? For people like me, the ones who slipped through the cracks." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I was there when Walter died, Mr. Holloway. In the room. I saw what happened to him. The black eyes, the voice that wasn't his. And when the lights came back on and everyone else forgot, I remembered. Just like you." My hands were trembling again. Not just the left one this time, both of them. "You've known about this for 50 years. Why haven't you done anything?" "Because there's nothing to do. I've spent half a century researching, investigating, following every lead. The gardeners are real. The cycles are real. And as far as I can determine, there's no way to stop them. Humanity reaches the singularity, humanity dies, humanity gets reset. It's been happening since before the dinosaurs, and it'll keep happening long after we're gone." "Then why contact me at all?" Leonard reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn leather journal, its pages yellowed and dog-eared from decades of use. He slid it across the table. "Because you did something impossible. You resisted the memory wipe. In 50 years of research, I've found references to only a handful of people across all recorded iterations who managed that, and every single one of them discovered something, some piece of the puzzle that brought us closer to understanding what the gardeners really are." I picked up the journal. The first page was covered in cramped handwriting, diagrams, equations I didn't recognize. "What is this?" "Everything I know, everything Walter knew, everything I've pieced together from fragments and hints scattered across 50 years of secret history." Leonard stood, buttoning his jacket. "Read it, memorize it, and then destroy it. The gardeners can't take memories, but they can certainly find physical evidence. Wait, I reached for his arm. Where are you going? Somewhere safe. The fact that I've made contact with you means they'll be looking for me now. I've gotten good at disappearing over the years. He paused at the end of the aisle, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. There's something in that journal about the singularity, Mr. Holloway. About what actually happens when humanity crosses that threshold. Walter figured it out just before he died. I've never been able to make sense of it, but maybe you will. He turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing, your son, Benjamin, correct? The gardeners don't harm children. It's one of their few apparent rules, perhaps the only mercy built into their design. But once he turns 18, that protection ends. Whatever you're going to do, I suggest you do it quickly. Then he was gone, slipping between the shelves and disappearing into the stacks like a ghost returning to its grave. I sat alone at the study carrel, Leonard's journal heavy in my hands, and thought about my son. 16 years old. 2 years until the gardeners might consider him fair game. 2 years to figure out a puzzle that had defeated every version of humanity for 200 million years. The odds were impossible, but impossible, I was beginning to learn, didn't mean what I used to think it meant. I spent the next 3 days locked in my apartment, reading Leonard's journal cover to cover. Then I read it again. Each pass revealed new details I'd missed, connections I hadn't seen, implications that made me set the book down and stare at the wall before I could continue. The journal was organized chronologically, starting with Leonard's memories of working under Walter Briggs in 1972. Those early entries were written in the shaky handwriting of a young man still processing trauma. Descriptions of Walter's increasingly erratic behavior, late-night phone calls where Walter would ramble about patterns in the genetic code, about messages from the future, about beings that tended humanity like crops in a field. Leonard had thought his mentor was having a breakdown. Then he'd witnessed the possession, the black eyes, the voice that spoke in harmonics no human throat could produce. And when the lights came back on and everyone else forgot, Leonard understood that Walter hadn't been crazy at all. The middle sections documented Leonard's decades of research. He'd tracked down every person who'd had contact with sample 15016-7b. He'd investigated unexplained deaths at NASA facilities, cross-referencing them with lunar sample testing schedules. He'd compiled a list of 17 researchers who'd died under suspicious circumstances between 1972 and 2015. But the final section was what kept me awake at night. Walter Briggs, in the days before his death, had decoded more of the DNA message than he'd revealed on the cassette recording. Leonard had found Walter's original notes hidden in a safety deposit box in Galveston, left there with instructions that they be opened only in the event of his death. The notes were fragmentary, incomplete, written in a cipher that Leonard had spent years cracking. But the core insight was clear enough. The singularity wasn't what we thought it was. The popular conception of technological singularity, the point where artificial intelligence exceeds human intelligence and triggers runaway technological growth, was only partially correct. According to Walter's translation of the DNA message, the singularity was actually a threshold of consciousness. When a species developed technology sophisticated enough to interface directly with the fabric of reality, to perceive and manipulate the underlying code of existence itself, that species crossed the singularity threshold. And that's when the gardeners noticed them. The DNA message used a term that Walter had struggled to translate. The closest English approximation was flowering, the moment when a species bloomed into full awareness of the universe's true nature. Every iteration of humanity reached this flowering point, and every iteration, without exception, was harvested immediately afterward. Harvested, not destroyed, harvested. The distinction mattered. The gardeners weren't killing humanity out of malice or fear. They were collecting something, some resource or product that consciousness generated at the moment of flowering. The reset that followed wasn't punishment. It was simply clearing the field for the next crop. We were being farmed for our minds. I put down the journal and walked to my window. Houston sprawled below me, millions of people going about their lives, completely unaware that they were livestock. Every thought they had, every dream, every moment of love or grief, All of it was just fertilizer, helping to grow whatever the gardeners intended to harvest. The final pages contained Leonard's theories about how to break the cycle. Most were crossed out, annotated with tested, failed, or impossible. But one entry, dated 6 months ago, was circled in red. The resistance to memory wipe may be the key. If certain individuals can retain awareness after gardener intervention, perhaps they can also retain awareness during the flowering itself. A conscious observer at the moment of harvest might be able to… what? Refuse? Redirect? I don't know. But DH may be our best chance to find out. Must make contact. DH David Holloway. Leonard had been watching me for months, waiting for the right moment to approach. I was part of his plan, perhaps his only plan. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. They found me. Don't trust Drummond. The journal is incomplete. Walter's final notes are at the observatory. Marfa, Texas. Go now. Before I could respond, a second message appeared. Tell my daughter I'm sorry I wasn't there. Then nothing. I tried calling the number, disconnected. I tried texting back. No delivery confirmation. Leonard Whitfield had just gone dark, and based on everything I knew about the gardeners, I had to assume he wasn't coming back. But his message raised a question I couldn't ignore. Don't trust Drummond. Why? Drummond had no memory of the archive room, no knowledge of the DNA message. He was just another person whose mind had been pruned by the gardeners. Unless the memory wipe hadn't worked on him either. Unless he'd been pretending to forget, the same way I'd been pretending to accept the official story. I grabbed my laptop and started digging through Johnson Space Center's personnel files. I still had my security credentials, at least for now, and Drummond's records were accessible at my clearance level. Birth date, education history, career timeline, all normal, all exactly what I'd expect from a decorated astronaut. But there was one detail that made me stop scrolling. In 1989, Arthur Drummond had been part of a records audit that discovered a classified archive in the basement of Building 31. The same archive where we'd found Walter Briggs' box. The official report stated that the archive contained obsolete equipment manuals and was of no historical significance. Drummond had found the box 20 years before he showed it to us. He'd had 2 decades to study Walter's notes, to listen to the recording, to prepare, and when Elliot and I rediscovered what he already knew, he'd played the role of the surprised leader perfectly. The man I'd trusted was part of this. Maybe he'd been part of it from the beginning. I packed a bag, clothes, cash, the journal, my laptop. I left my phone on the kitchen counter and walked out through the service entrance, cutting through the parking garage next door. The drive to Marfa took 7 hours. I pushed west on the I-10, watching the Texas landscape flatten and dry out as Houston's humidity gave way to the high desert. Oil derricks nodded along the highway like mechanical birds. Marfa is a strange town, population under 2,000, but it's become a destination for artists drawn to its remoteness and mysterious lights. The McDonald Observatory sits in the mountains nearby, one of the darkest sky sites in North America. I arrived just after sunset. The observatory wouldn't open for public viewing for another hour, but I found a maintenance access road that led up the mountain. The facility was larger than I'd expected. Multiple domes, a visitor center, administrative buildings scattered across the rocky terrain. The first dome was locked. The second was empty except for a massive telescope. The third had light spilling from under its door. I pushed it open slowly. Inside, the dome was configured for maintenance rather than observation. The telescope lowered to a horizontal position, panels removed from its base to expose a tangle of wiring and servos. Standing in the center of the room, illuminated by a single work lamp, was Arthur Drummond. He didn't look surprised to see me. "David," he said calmly, "I was wondering how long it would take you to figure it out." "You've known this whole time, since 1989. "Longer than that." He stepped away from the telescope, his shadow stretching across the curved wall of the dome. "I found the box in 89, yes, but I'd been aware since Apollo 17, since I walked on the moon and felt something watching me from the regolith beneath my boots." You're one of them, one of the ones who remembers." Drummond shook his head. "It's more complicated than that. Some of us remember because we resist the wipe, like you. Others remember because the gardeners want us to remember. We're given a choice: serve or be erased. You work for them. I maintain stability for them. There's a difference." He spread his hands. "Every iteration produces individuals who slip through the cracks. People like Walter, Leonard, you. Left unchecked, you create chaos, spread information that destabilizes the population, makes the harvest less efficient. My job is to identify and neutralize those individuals." "You killed Leonard." "Leonard killed himself. I simply provided the circumstances." Drummond's expression was almost paternal. "It's not personal. It's maintenance." I backed toward the door. Drummond made no move to stop me. "You can run if you want," he said. "You'll die tired. The gardeners are patient, and their reach is absolute. But there's another option. Join you. Join the winning side. You've demonstrated abilities rare even among the memory resistant. You could be useful, and keep Benjamin protected beyond his 18th birthday." My son's name in his mouth made something cold twist in my chest. Stay away from him. I'm not the one you need to worry about. Drummond walked to a console near the base of the telescope and pressed a button. A hidden panel slid open in the floor, revealing a metal case about the size of a shoebox. Walter's final notes, everything he learned about the flowering, the harvest, the true nature of what the gardeners collect. Leonard was right. It's all here. Take it, read it, and then make your choice. He stepped back, leaving the case exposed. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because the gardeners are curious about you. The resistance to memory wipe is one thing. But there's something else in your genetic profile that's flagged you for observation rather than removal. They want to see what you do. Consider it a test." I stared at the case. Every instinct screamed trap. But the notes were within reach, and I'd driven 7 hours to find them. I grabbed the case and ran. Drummond's voice followed me out into the night. "I'll see you soon, David. One way or another, I'll see you very soon." And I drove through the darkness with the case on the passenger seat, heading west toward Las Cruces. The notes are spread across the bed behind me now, pages covered in Walter Briggs' cramped handwriting, diagrams unlike anything in any scientific textbook. The truth is worse than I imagined, worse than extinction, worse than being harvested. The gardeners aren't aliens. They aren't gods or demons or beings from another dimension. They're us. They're what humanity becomes after the flowering, a version of our species so transformed by contact with the underlying nature of reality that they've transcended time itself. The future humans who left the DNA on the moon weren't warning us about the gardeners. They were warning us about what we'll become. Every cycle, humanity flowers. Every cycle, the newly flowered humans are absorbed into the collective outside of time. And every cycle, that collective resets the timeline, planting seeds for a new iteration, because they need more minds. They need more consciousness to fuel whatever existence they've built beyond linear time. The gardeners aren't farming humanity, they're recruiting us. And there's no escape, because escape would mean refusing to become what we're destined to be. The notes explain one more thing, the detail that made Walter Briggs drive off the Galveston seawall. The gardeners remember everything, every iteration, every individual, every thought of every human who ever lived. They carry all of it forward, a library of consciousness spanning 200 million years. Which means they remember me. Not this version, David Holloway, geneticist, father of Benjamin, but all the previous versions. All 7,846 iterations of whatever pattern my consciousness represents. And in every single iteration, I've reached this exact moment. I've learned the truth. I've sat in a motel room or a cave or a shelter, and I've faced the same impossible choice. This has happened before, it will happen again, and no version of me has ever found a way out. Until now. Maybe, unless this is exactly what every previous version thought, right before they failed. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Elliot's face with those black pits where his eyes should have been, heard that layered voice speaking through his mouth. The gardeners remember everything. They remembered all the versions of me that came before. They were watching right now, curious about what made this iteration different. The motel room felt smaller in the dark. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed, Walter's notes spread around me in a semicircle, trying to find something, anything, that previous versions of myself had missed. The handwriting blurred together after a while, equations and diagrams swimming in and out of focus. Around 3 a.m, I found it. A page near the back, different from the others. The handwriting was shakier here, the lines less precise. Walter had written this in a hurry, or under duress, or both. At the top of the page, underlined twice, the anchor theory. The gardeners exist outside of linear time. They've transcended the normal flow of cause and effect, which is why they can deposit DNA in the ancient past and harvest consciousness from the present. But according to Walter, their existence outside of time comes with a limitation. They can't directly interact with anyone who's firmly anchored in a specific temporal moment. The memory wipe works because most people's consciousness is fluid, unfixed, easily molded by external forces. But some individuals, the ones who resist, have what Walter called a temporal anchor. Something in their past, some memory or experience that binds them so tightly to a specific point in time that the gardeners can't dislodge it. I thought about my own anchor. What moment in my life was I bound to so strongly that even beings from outside time couldn't shake it loose? The answer came immediately, with a pain I'd spent years trying to bury. Benjamin's birth, October 14th, 2009, 16 years ago. I'd been in the delivery room, holding my wife's hand, watching my son enter the world. The fluorescent lights had been too bright, the air too cold, but none of that mattered when the doctor placed that tiny, screaming bundle in my arms. In that moment, everything else had fallen away. My career, my ambitions, my fears. There was only Benjamin, small and red and furious at being thrust into existence, and the overwhelming certainty that I would do anything to protect him. I remembered the weight of him against my chest, the way his fingers had curled around my thumb, impossibly small, impossibly strong. The smell of him, new and clean and alive. That was my anchor, the moment that defined who I was more than any other. And according to Walter's notes, anchors could be weaponized. The theory was incomplete, barely sketched out. Walter had died before he could develop it further. But the core idea was there. If a memory-resistant individual could strengthen their anchor enough, could bind themselves so completely to a single point in time, they might be able to resist not just the memory wipe, but the flowering itself. They might be able to remain conscious while everyone else was absorbed into the Gardner collective. And a conscious observer at the moment of absorption might be able to, what? Refuse? Redirect? Break the cycle somehow? It was a thread, the thinnest possible thread, but it was the only one I had. I needed to see Benjamin. The burner phone I'd picked up in Houston still had battery. I dialed his number from memory. His mother had given him a cell phone for his 15th birthday, against my objections at the time. Now, I was grateful for it. 3 rings, 4. Then a sleepy voice. Hello? Ben, it's Dad. Silence. When he spoke again, he sounded more awake, confused. Dad, it's like 4 a.m. What's going on? I need to see you today. Can you get away from your mother's place without her knowing? What? Why would I? I can't explain over the phone, but it's important. More important than anything I've ever asked you. Another pause. I could hear him breathing, probably trying to figure out if his father had finally lost his mind. We'd grown distant over the past few years. The divorce had been hard on him, and I'd buried myself in work instead of being there when he needed me. I had no right to ask for his trust now. But I asked anyway. There's a diner in Alamogordo, I said. Rosie's on White Sands Boulevard. Can you get there by noon? Alamogordo. Dad, that's like... I don't even know how far that is. 3 hours from Las Cruces. Your mother has that conference in Albuquerque this weekend, right? She won't be home until Sunday. How do you know about... Please, Ben. I know I haven't been the father you deserved. I know I've let you down more times than I can count. But I need you to trust me one more time. Just this once. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Then, "Rosie's. Noon. This better be good, Dad." The line went dead. I spent the next few hours preparing. There were things in Walter's notes that Benjamin needed to know. Not everything, not the full horror of what was coming, but enough to understand why I was about to ask him to do something impossible. The drive to Alamogordo took just over an hour. The sun was climbing by the time I reached White Sands Boulevard, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange. Rosie's Diner was a chrome and neon relic from the 1950s, the kind of place that served coffee in thick ceramic mugs and played oldies on a jukebox that probably hadn't been updated since the Reagan administration. I got there early, took a booth in the back corner and waited. Benjamin arrived at 12:15. He'd grown since I'd last seen him, taller, broader in the shoulders, with the beginnings of a beard shadowing his jaw. He walked through the door with the uncertain gait of someone who wasn't sure what he was walking into, scanning the diner until his eyes found me in the back booth. He looked so much like I had at his age that it hurt to see him. The same dark hair, the same narrow face, even the same way of hunching his shoulders when he was nervous. "You look like crap," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Thanks, you look good. Really good." "I borrowed Kyle's car, told him I needed to visit a friend in El Paso. If Mom finds out, she's going to kill both of us." He studied my face, the circles under my eyes, the tremor in my hands that I couldn't quite hide. "What's going on, Dad? Are you in trouble?" "Yes, but not the kind you're thinking." I told him. Not everything. I left out the worst parts, the harvesting, the absorption, the fact that every version of humanity had failed to escape this fate. But I told him about the DNA on the moon, about the message from the future, about beings that existed outside of time and watched humanity like farmers watching crops. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, stirring his coffee with a spoon even though he hadn't added anything to it. "You know how crazy this sounds, right?" "I know. Like legitimately insane. If Mom heard you talking like this, she'd have you committed." "Probably." Benjamin set down the spoon. "But you believe it." "I've seen things, Ben, things I can't explain any other way." "The guy at your lab, Elliot, the one who died?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "I read about it online. The news said it was a brain hemorrhage. Natural causes." He looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't expected. Not disbelief, but calculation. "But you were there. You saw something different." "I saw him possessed by something that shouldn't exist. And then I watched him die when they were done using him. And now you think they're coming for you." "I think they're curious about me, which might be worse." Benjamin was quiet again. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the boulevard, kicking up dust that swirled in the morning light. "What do you need from me?" he asked. The question hit me harder than I expected. Not "do you need me," but "what do you need?" My son, 16 years old, offering to help without even fully understanding what he was offering. "I need you to be my anchor," I said. "There's a theory, something I found in the notes. If I can bind myself strongly enough to a specific moment in time, I might be able to resist what's coming. But I can't do it alone. I need something to hold on to. Someone. And you want that to be me. You're the only thing in my life that ever really mattered, Ben. Everything else, my career, my marriage, my research, none of it means anything compared to the moment you were born. That's my anchor. That's what keeps me grounded in time." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took my hand, the one with the tremor, and held it steady. "Okay," he said, "tell me what I need to do." That's when the diner's front windows exploded inward, and Arthur Drummond walked through the shower of broken glass with a smile on his face. "I was hoping you'd contact him," he said, brushing fragments from his jacket. Behind him, the morning sunlight streamed through the shattered window frame, casting his shadow long across the diner's checkered floor. Children are protected, but that protection ends the moment they choose to involve themselves in adult affairs. Congratulations, Benjamin. You've just made yourself a legitimate target. I pushed my son behind me and faced the man I'd once trusted with my life. In the distance, I could hear sirens. Someone had called the police. But I knew with terrible certainty that help wasn't coming. Not the kind that could stop what was about to happen. The gardeners had found us, and now Benjamin was in their sights. This was my fault. Every version of me, across nearly 8,000 iterations, had probably made this same mistake. Reached out to the person they loved most, and doomed them in the process. The gardeners knew this pattern, they'd been waiting for it, but this time would be different. It had to be. Because this time, I was ready to do something none of the previous versions had been willing to do. Drummond stepped through the ruined window frame like a man entering his own living room. Glass crunched under his shoes. Behind me, I felt Benjamin tense, his hand gripping my shoulder. "You knew I'd call him," I said. "Of course. You've called him in every iteration where you survived long enough to learn the truth. It's one of your patterns." Drummond stopped a few feet away, hands clasped behind his back. "The love between parent and child is remarkably consistent across timelines. It's almost beautiful, really. And almost always fatal. How many times have you done this, hunted down versions of me? Personally? 412. I've been a stabilizer for a long time, David. Longer than you'd believe." He smiled, and there was something inhuman in the expression. Too wide, too fixed. "But you're the first version to make it this far with your memories intact and your son at your side. The gardeners are genuinely curious about what happens next." The diner had emptied. The cook and waitress had fled through the back when the windows shattered. We were alone, just the three of us, and the dust motes swirling in the morning light. "What are my options?" I asked. "The same as always. Join us and both of you live. Resist and..." He shrugged. "Well, you know how this ends." "No." Benjamin's voice was steadier than I expected. He stepped out from behind me, facing Drummond directly. "I don't know how this ends. Someone want to fill me in?" Drummond studied him with clinical interest. "Your father will be harvested along with the rest of humanity when the flowering occurs. That's not negotiable. It's the fundamental purpose of your species. But he has a choice about what happens before then. He can spend his remaining time in comfort, with his memories intact, watching over you until you come of age. Or he can spend it running, hunted, knowing that every moment brings both of you closer to a very unpleasant end. That's not a choice, that's extortion. All choices are extortion, young man. The universe doesn't offer freedom, only varying degrees of coercion." I looked at my son, 16 years old, standing in a ruined diner in the New Mexico desert, facing down a man who'd been killing people like me for centuries. He should have been terrified. Instead, his jaw was set, his eyes clear. He looked like he was ready to fight. And that's when I understood what none of the previous versions had been willing to do. It wasn't about fighting, it wasn't about running. It wasn't even about finding some clever way to break the cycle. It was about letting go. "Ben," I said quietly, "do you trust me?" "Yes." "Even now? Even knowing what you know?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes." I turned back to Drummond. The anchor theory. Walter Briggs figured out that memory-resistant individuals are bound to specific moments in time. That's why the wipe doesn't work on us. We're too firmly attached to our temporal position. I'm aware of Walter's theories. They were interesting, but ultimately irrelevant. No, they were incomplete. I took a step toward him. Walter thought the anchor worked by strengthening the individual's connection to time. But that's not it. The anchor works because it creates a paradox. A memory so fixed, so unchangeable that the gardeners can't absorb it without destabilizing their entire existence outside of time. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across Drummond's face. That's not possible, isn't it? You said the gardeners exist outside of linear time. They've transcended cause and effect. But transcending something isn't the same as being immune to it. They still need the timeline to function. That's why they reset it instead of simply existing in a permanent state. They're dependent on the flow of time, even though they're not bound by it. David, whatever you're thinking, an anchor isn't just a memory, it's a fixed point. A moment that can't be changed because changing it would unravel everything that came after. And if someone with a strong enough anchor were to do something truly irreversible, something that forced the timeline to crystallize around that moment. I pulled the gun from my waistband. I'd bought it at a pawn shop in Las Cruces the night before, a .38 revolver with 6 rounds in the cylinder. I'd never fired a weapon in my life, but that didn't matter. I wasn't planning to aim it at Drummond, I was planning to aim it at myself. Dad! Benjamin lunged toward me, but I stepped back, keeping the barrel pressed under my chin. If I die right now, I said, my consciousness ends here. This moment, this diner. My son watching me pull the trigger. That becomes my anchor, not a memory, but the actual termination point of my existence in time. Drummond's expression had gone very still. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. Every other version of me has been harvested at the flowering because they were still alive when it happened, still moving through time, still subject to the gardener's influence. But if I'm already dead, if my consciousness ends at a fixed point before the flowering occurs, then I become a paradox. A mind that should have been absorbed but can't be, because it terminated before absorption was possible. The gardeners will simply reset the timeline. They've done it 7,000 times before. That's the thing though, they reset after the flowering, not before. The whole point of the cycle is to harvest consciousness at the moment of maximum development. If I die now, my consciousness becomes unavailable. And if Benjamin is right there when it happens, if my death becomes part of his anchor, then he becomes unavailable too. We become a closed loop, a knot in the timeline that the gardeners can't untangle without unraveling their entire system. Benjamin was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Horror, maybe, or understanding. Dad, he said slowly, are you saying you're going to kill yourself to save me? I'm saying I'm going to kill myself to save everyone, every version of humanity that's ever existed or ever will exist. If I'm right, if the anchor theory works the way I think it does, then my death creates a permanent flaw in the gardener's design, a crack that spreads through every cycle, past and future. Eventually, the whole system collapses, the cycles end, humanity gets to live and die on its own terms, without being farmed for our minds. And if you're wrong, then I'm just another version of David Holloway who couldn't find a way out, but at least I'll have tried something new. Drummond took a step forward. The gardeners won't allow this. Then where are they? I looked around the empty diner. You said they're curious. That means they're watching. And if they could stop me, they would have already. Silence. The only sound was the wind through the shattered windows, carrying dust and the distant hum of traffic on the boulevard. They can't, I realized. They can't intervene directly because doing so would acknowledge my theory is correct. If they stop me from creating a paradox, they prove that paradoxes are a threat. And if paradoxes are a threat, then others will try what I'm trying. They're trapped. All they can do is watch and hope I lose my nerve. Benjamin moved closer, not to stop me, to stand beside me. No. If you're doing this, he said, then I need to be part of it. You said my anchor was your birth, but your anchor is my birth too. We're connected. If you die without me being part of it, maybe the paradox isn't strong enough. Ben – you said you need something to hold on to, someone. I'm right here, Dad. I've been right here the whole time. His voice cracked, just slightly. You weren't there for a lot of things. The divorce, the move, all those weekends you cancelled because of work. But you can be here for this. You can let me be here for you. My hand was shaking. The tremor that had started in the lab, the night I first sequenced that damn sample, was spreading through my whole body now. But Benjamin reached out and steadied my arm, his grip warm and firm. Together, he said. Whatever happens, we do it together. I looked at my son, 16 years old. The best thing I'd ever done, even if I'd failed at everything else. It wasn't a memory, it wasn't a fixed point in time, and it was love. The one thing the gardeners, beings who existed outside of time, who had transcended human emotion along with human mortality, couldn't understand or replicate. Love was chaos. Love was irrational. Love didn't follow the rules of cause and effect because it didn't care about consequences. The gardeners had been farming consciousness for 200 million years, but they'd never figured out how to harvest love. I lowered the gun. "Not like this," I said. "What?" "Dying isn't the answer. It's never been the answer. That's why every version of me has failed. We all thought we had to sacrifice ourselves to break the cycle. But sacrifice is just another pattern. Another predictable response they've seen thousands of times before." I looked at Drummond. His face had gone blank, unreadable, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "What breaks the pattern isn't death," I said. "It's choosing to live. Choosing to stay anchored, stay conscious, stay present, even knowing what's coming. Every version of me has run or fought or given up. But what if this version just refuses? What if I keep living, keep remembering, keep holding on to this moment with my son, and never let it go?" Benjamin squeezed my arm. "Then what happens at the flowering?" "I don't know. No one's ever tried it. But maybe, just maybe, a consciousness that's anchored strongly enough to resist absorption becomes something new, something the gardeners can't predict or control." I handed the gun to Benjamin. "Keep this, hide it, and whatever happens next, don't let me forget who I am." Drummond's body convulsed. His eyes rolled back, and when they returned, they were black, the same lightless pits I'd seen in Elliot's face. "Interesting," the layered voice said. "Very interesting indeed. We will be watching, David Holloway. We will be watching very closely." Then he collapsed, and the diner fell silent. My son and I walked out through the shattered windows into the New Mexico morning. Somewhere behind us, a man who used to be Arthur Drummond was waking up with no memory of the last hour. Ahead of us was the desert and the highway and an uncertain future. But we were together, and for the first time in nearly 8,000 iterations, that might be enough. 6 months have passed since that morning in Alamogordo. Benjamin finished his junior year at a new school in Flagstaff, Arizona. We moved there together after I resigned from Johnson Space Center, citing personal reasons. Nobody questioned it. Scientists burn out all the time, especially after watching a colleague die in front of them. The official story wrote itself. We rent a small house at the edge of town, close enough to the mountains that we can see the San Francisco peaks from the kitchen window. Benjamin has made friends, a kid named Oscar who shares his taste in obscure music, another named Trevor who's teaching him to rock climb. He seems happy, normal, the kind of teenager who worries about grades and whether his car will pass inspection, not about beings from outside time who farm human consciousness. I haven't told him everything. He knows enough to understand why we left Houston, why we use cash whenever possible, why I check the locks 3 times every night. But I've spared him the details about the flowering, the harvest, the fact that we have approximately 11 months before humanity reaches the singularity and everything changes. Some nights I sit on the back porch and watch the stars come out. I think about the moon up there, carrying its ancient cargo of human DNA, waiting patiently for whatever comes next. I think about all the versions of myself who sat in similar places, looking at similar skies, trying to find hope in a situation that seemed hopeless. Most of them failed. The gardeners told me that much. 7,846 iterations, and not one of them found a way to break the cycle. But none of them had what I have. Last week, Benjamin came home from school with a bruise on his cheek. Some older kid had said something about his absent mother, and Benjamin had thrown the first punch. He lost the fight, but he'd stood his ground. When he told me about it, there was a defiance in his eyes that reminded me of myself at his age. That same stubborn refusal to back down, even when the odds were impossible. I grounded him for a week, then I took him out for ice cream and told him I was proud of him. That's what the gardeners don't understand. They think consciousness is the crop, that human minds are the product they're farming. But consciousness is just the container. The thing that matters, the thing that makes us worth preserving, is what we choose to do with it. Love, defiance, the decision to keep fighting even when you know you can't win. They can harvest our minds. They can absorb our awareness into their collective outside of time. But they can't take the choices we made while we were alive. Those belong to us, locked into the timeline like fossils in stone. The flowering is coming. I can feel it sometimes, late at night, a pressure at the edges of my thoughts, a sense of something vast waiting just beyond perception. When it arrives, I don't know what will happen. Maybe I'll be absorbed like everyone else. Maybe my anchor will hold and I'll become something new. Maybe the whole cycle will finally crack apart. But until then, I'm going to keep living, keep remembering, keep holding on to my son and the moment we walked out of that diner together, into the desert light. The gardeners are still watching, I know they are. Let them watch. Let them see what love looks like when it refuses to let go.